I have been asked about pivot tables in probably about 90% of the jobs that I've interviewed for. If you're using Excel in your job, you need to know how to use a pivot table. So take 3 minutes with me to learn the basics. I promise you it's going to save you a ton of time in the long run. If you don't even know what a pivot table is, it's just a table that you can create in Excel to summarize your data. So let's just go through a really quick example. I have this sample data set here with daily weather data. And let's say I want to see the average of each of my fields by weather description. I could manually create a table to the side and do some average if calculations, but it's going to be much quicker to create a pivot table. So start by selecting all of your data and click Insert and Pivot Table. And this Create Pivot Table box is going to pop up. We already selected the range of data that we want to analyze, so I'm good on this first selection, and for this second selection, I have the option to choose where I want to put my pivot table. I like to just put my pivot table on a new worksheet, so I'm just going to click OK. Alright, so here's my pivot table in my new tab. And now we can choose what we want to see on this pivot table. And we'll do that by clicking and dragging our fields into one of these 4 boxes. The field that you want to aggregate by or summarize by is going to go in your rows section. So I'll go ahead and stick my weather description field into my rows section. And looking back at my pivot table here, I now have all of the different weather descriptions from my raw data. The next thing we need to do is determine which fields we want aggregated. Let's just say I want to see the average temperature, humidity, and precipitation. These 3 fields are going to go into my values section. So here are my aggregations in my pivot table, but you'll notice that Excel chose to calculate the sum of each of these fields. Instead, I want the average, so I'm going to come back to each of these fields, and this will look a little bit different if you have a PC, but on a Mac, you'll click this information dot, and now you can choose how you want to summarize each field. So I'll go ahead and click average for each of these fields. And there we go. We have our data summarized in a nice clean pivot table, and it only took about 60 seconds. If you want to filter the data that goes into your pivot table, you can put whichever field you want to filter by into your filter section. So let's say that I want to filter by date, because I know my data is bad on January 3rd and 4th, so I want to exclude the data from those days. Now I have the option to filter my data up above my pivot table. So I can just click this drop-down arrow and exclude January 3rd and 4th. There is a lot more that you can do with pivot tables, but now you at least know enough to get started. So I hope this helped.
小红书